rain drummed softly against the stained glass windows of St. Winifred's convent, casting rippling colours upon the cold stone floor. It was an ordinary evening, or so it seemed, until the scream shattered the sacred silence. By the time Sister Agnes reached the cloister, gasping for breath, she found Sister Margaret collapsed on the floor outside the chapel, her eyes frozen wide in shock, her lips forming a silent prayer that would never be finished. A single candle flickered beside her motionless form, casting eerie shadows against the wall. The door to the chapel stood ajar, but there was no sign of struggle, no forced entry. The nuns who arrived moments later whispered hurried prayers, clutching their rosaries. Sister Margaret was well loved, a woman of unwavering faith and kindness. That she should meet such an end, here within the hallowed walls of their convent, was unthinkable. Reverend Mother Beatrice pressed her hands, together her knuckles white. "She's gone," she whispered, closing Sister Margaret's eyes. The only clue was a strange one, a single scrap of parchment left upon the stone floor beside the body. The ink upon it was smudged, but the words remained legible. Benedictus, qui venit in nomine Domini. The police arrived swiftly but found themselves at an impasse. There were no signs of an intruder, no apparent motive. The nuns, though shaken, were accounted for. Sister Margaret had no known enemies, and yet she had been found dead, her face locked in an expression of frozen terror. There was no mark upon her body, no wound to suggest violence. The only abnormality was the whispering that several of the nuns claimed to have heard moments before her death, an eerie, unintelligible murmur echoing through the chapel walls. The constable in charge of the case, a stout and perpetually flustered man named Sergeant Graves, sighed deeply as he rubbed his temples. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "No cause of death, no sign of forced entry, no suspects. It was Reverend Mother Beatrice who suggested calling in an outside mind." "There is a woman," she said hesitantly, as if the very idea of inviting an outsider into their convent was unsettling. "She is not of the police, but she possesses a most remarkable gift for untangling such perplexities. Her name is Miss Marple." And so it was that 2 days later Miss Jane Marple arrived at St. Winifred's convent, wrapped in a sensible woolen coat, her expression mild but keenly observant. She was greeted with a mixture of curiosity and reservation. An elderly woman with a kindly face hardly seemed the sort to solve a crime that had left even the police baffled. As she stepped inside, she paused, noting the faint scent of beeswax and incense. Her eyes swept over the nuns gathered in uneasy silence, and then to the polished stone floor where Sister Margaret had fallen. The scrap of parchment had been preserved as evidence, and she was handed a photograph of it. She read the Latin inscription aloud, her voice thoughtful. "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Reverend Mother Beatrice nodded. "A common passage. It is part of our prayers." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with something unreadable. "Yes, quite common. And yet a clue is never left without purpose." She moved slowly through the convent, pausing at the chapel door. "Tell me," she said, glancing at the nearest nun, "this whispering that some of you heard, was it a voice you recognized?" Sister Agnes hesitated. It was soft, like a prayer spoken from a distance. But there was something unnatural about it, as if it came from nowhere." Miss Marple nodded, deep in thought. She examined the door, the floor, even the shadows cast by the high-arched ceilings. Then she turned back to Sergeant Graves. You mentioned there was no sign of a struggle? None at all. Then tell me, Sergeant, do you believe in fear as a weapon? He frowned. I suppose fear can be powerful, but Miss Marple clasped her hands together, a glint of understanding in her eyes. I do believe Sister Margaret was frightened to death, but the question remains, frightened by what? The investigation had only just begun. Miss Marple moved with unassuming grace through the convent halls, her keen blue eyes flicking over every detail, every subtle sign overlooked by others. She had spent a lifetime observing human nature, and experience had taught her that the most inconspicuous things often held the greatest significance. Sergeant Graves, trailing behind her, with a mixture of skepticism and obligation, cleared his throat. I must admit, Miss Marple, I don't see how an elderly woman could simply drop dead from fright. We found no evidence of a struggle, no wounds, no poison. It's as if she just stopped. Miss Marple paused, adjusting the lace cuffs of her cardigan. Fear, Sergeant, can be as deadly as any blade or bullet. But fear must have a cause. Something she saw, or believed she saw, terrified her beyond endurance. The question is, what? Was it? Reverend Mother Beatrice approached, her hands folded in front of her. Miss Marple, I trust you will treat our convent with the respect it deserves. The sisters are uneasy. We live a simple life here, free from the troubles of the world. That such a thing could happen. Her voice wavered, and she composed herself. I will assist in any way I can. Miss Marple inclined her head. Then perhaps you might tell me about Sister Margaret. Had she been behaving strangely before her death? Had she confided in anyone? The Reverend Mother hesitated. Not to my knowledge. She was as devoted as ever, but... She glanced down the hallway toward the dormitory. Sister Bridget shared a room with her. She may know something more. Miss Marple followed Reverend Mother Beatrice to the dormitory, where Sister Bridget, a woman of about 30 with a delicate freckled face, sat on her narrow cot, fingers gripping the rosary in her lap. She looked up as they entered, her eyes shadowed with grief. I understand this is difficult, my dear, Miss Marple said kindly, as she took a seat across from her. But anything you can tell me, no matter how small, may help us understand what happened. Sister Bridget swallowed, clutching her rosary tighter. She had been uneasy, she admitted. The last few nights she hardly slept. I heard her stirring, whispering prayers in the dark. When I asked what troubled her, she only said, "There is something I must do." But she wouldn't explain. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. Did she seem afraid? Sister Bridget hesitated. Not afraid exactly, but burdened, as if she carried a great weight upon her heart. And then, the night before her voice faltered. She wrote something in her journal. I don't know what it said. When I woke up, the book was gone. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Gone? Sister Bridget nodded. I assumed she had taken it with her, but when I checked later, I couldn't find it anywhere. A missing journal, Miss Marple murmured. That is most interesting. Sergeant Graves folded his arms. Couldn't she have simply misplaced it? Possibly, Miss Marple said. Or someone may have taken it. She turned back to Sister Bridget. Was Sister Margaret in the habit of keeping a journal? Not that I know of. That's why it struck me as odd. Miss Marple tapped her fingers lightly against the wooden arm of the chair. And on the night of her death, did you hear anything unusual? Sister Bridget hesitated again. just the whispering. Miss Marple leaned forward. "Tell me, child, did it sound like a voice you knew?" Sister Bridget shivered. "I don't know. It was faint, like a sigh carried on the wind. But it was close, as if it were right beside me." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. A missing journal, a whispering voice, a woman dead of sheer terror. There was a pattern here, though not yet visible. She stood. "I should like to see Sister Margaret's things." The Reverend Mother led them to a small wooden chest at the foot of Sister Margaret's bed. The convent was simple, and personal belongings were few. A well-worn Bible, a few neatly folded garments, a single rosary. Miss Marple lifted the Bible and flipped through its pages. A pressed violet was tucked between the leaves of the Psalms. Beneath it, something else, something out of place. A single yellowed slip of paper. Miss Marple extracted it carefully. The edges were worn, the ink faded. It was a fragment of an old letter. The words were partially smudged, but one line stood out. "Forgive me, for I have sinned." Miss Marple's lips pursed. This was no ordinary prayer. Sergeant Graves peered over her shoulder. "What do you make of it?" Miss Marple tucked the letter away. "That remains to be seen, but I do believe someone in this convent has secrets they would rather keep hidden as—" She turned. She caught sight of something else, something seemingly insignificant, yet curiously misplaced. A single dark feather lying just beneath the chest. She bent down and picked it up, rolling it between her fingers. A crow's feather. Her mind whirred. A whispering voice. A vanished journal. A letter of confession. And now, a feather. A picture was beginning to form, but the full image was not yet clear. She stood, slipping the feather into her pocket. "Tell me, Reverend Mother, have you had any visitors recently? Anyone unusual?" The Reverend Mother's lips tightened. "No. We are a cloistered order. Few outsiders come here." Miss Marple smiled gently. "I see. Then I suppose the answer must lie within these walls." And with that she turned, her mind already piecing together the next step in the puzzle. Miss Marple sat in the dimly lit study reserved for visitors, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she waited for the first of the sisters to be brought in. A single candle flickered on the desk before her, casting restless shadows along the stone walls. Sergeant Graves, standing stiffly nearby, sighed in mild impatience. "I suppose you've a particular method to this, Miss Marple?" he asked. "Oh, yes," she said mildly, her fingers tracing the edge of the delicate lace on her sleeve. "People do have a way of revealing themselves, Sergeant. One simply needs to listen." Reverend Mother Beatrice entered first, composed but weary. She sat across from Miss Marple, hands folded in her lap, and regarded her with quiet resolve. "You have been at St. Winifred's for many years, have you not?" Miss Marple asked kindly. 32 years, the Reverend Mother replied. "You knew Sister Margaret well, then, as well as anyone can know another?" Miss Marple nodded, choosing her words carefully. "When did you last speak to her?" The Reverend Mother's gaze drifted toward the candle. The morning before her death. She had been unusually quiet, though I did not press her. It is not uncommon for the sisters to seek solitude in prayer when something weighs upon them. Did she ever confide in you? A hesitation, subtle, but there. She was not one to speak of personal burdens, Reverend Mother said. She carried them with grace. Miss Marple's expression softened. And yet she seemed troubled. A pause. There was something. The Reverend Mother hesitated again. 3 nights before she died, she asked me about an old record, one of our parish logs from many years ago. I told her she was welcome to review it, but I never saw her with it. I do not know if she found what she was looking for. Miss Marple filed this away. Do you know what she was searching for? The Reverend Mother shook her head. She did not say. The door creaked open, and Sister Agnes entered. The younger woman looked pale, her fingers working nervously at the beads of her rosary. Reverend Mother Beatrice gave a small nod, excusing herself, and Sister Agnes took the seat across from Miss Marple. You were the first to find Sister Margaret, Miss Marple said gently. Yes. The sister's voice trembled slightly. I heard something. A whisper, just before I found her. A whisper, Miss Marple repeated. Can you describe it? Sister Agnes's brows knit together. It was soft, almost like a breath. I could not make out the words. Do you recall seeing anything unusual? Sister Agnes hesitated. No. Miss Marple studied her carefully. Are you quite certain? A flicker of something. Doubt. Fear. The nun pressed her lips together. I may have seen a shadow, she admitted. But it could have been the candlelight. I was frightened. Miss Marple nodded understandingly. Of course, dear, but try to remember. Was the shadow moving? Was there a figure? Sister Agnes shook her head. I do not know. Miss Marple watched her for a moment longer before offering a reassuring smile. That will be all for now, my dear. Thank you. The nun rose quickly, nearly tripping over her robes in her haste to leave. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly as the door clicked shut. Sergeant Graves leaned in. She's hiding something, Miss Marple sighed. Perhaps, or perhaps she simply fears what she does not understand. The next to enter was Sister Bridget. Her hands were steady as she sat before them, but her eyes flicked toward the door, as if eager to leave. Miss Marple smiled warmly. Sister Bridget, I wanted to ask you about the journal. The nun's fingers twitched slightly against her habit. I told you. I woke up and it was gone. Miss Marple tilted her head. Did you tell anyone else about it? Sister Bridget shook her head. No, Miss Marple's voice was light, almost conversational. Yet, someone else must have known it existed. Someone who wanted it. Sister Bridget's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Miss Marple regarded her carefully. My dear, I believe you saw something, or suspect something. If you truly wish to honor Sister Margaret's memory, you must tell me the truth. The nun's throat bobbed in a nervous swallow. I think someone was in our room that night. Sergeant Graves straightened. What? Sister Bridget wrung her hands. I woke up briefly. The candle had burned low, but I thought I saw a figure near Sister Margaret's bed. I was half asleep. I thought I must have imagined it. But when I woke in the morning, the journal was gone. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. And you did not think to mention this sooner? I was afraid, Sister Bridget whispered, and I did not want to accuse anyone. Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. Did you recognize the figure? The nun shook her head. It was only a shadow. Miss Marple considered this. Thank you, Sister Bridget. You have been most helpful. As the nun left, Miss Marple turned to Sergeant Graves. A figure in the night, a missing journal, and a frightened woman. Tell me, Sergeant, Who do you suppose would be so eager to make a diary disappear? Graves scowled. Someone with something to hide. Miss Marple nodded. Precisely. And I believe we have a rather tangled web to unravel. She stood, smoothing her skirts. There was still more to speak to, and the truth was lurking just beneath the surface. Miss Marple sat quietly in the convent's small study, her mind weaving through the strands of the mystery like a seasoned seamstress unraveling. A tangle of fine lace, a missing journal, a frightened witness, an unknown figure in the night. Each thread was connected, though the pattern remained unclear. The death of Sister Margaret had been no ordinary tragedy. It had been, she felt certain, the result of something long buried, something someone was desperate to keep hidden. Sergeant Graves shifted impatiently. So far, all we know is that Sister Margaret was troubled. Someone took her journal, and someone, perhaps the same person, was in her room that night. Miss Marple gave him a mild smile. But you see, Sergeant, we also know that Sister Margaret was searching for something in the old records, and that suggests a past connection, something she discovered, or rediscovered, that frightened her. Graves exhaled. So we're looking for an old sin? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. I rather think so. And sins, Sergeant, have a way of catching up with people, especially in places where they were thought to be buried. A soft knock interrupted them. The Reverend Mother had returned, her face calm but watchful. Miss Marple, you wish to see the parish records? Indeed, if it would not be too much trouble. Reverend Mother Beatrice hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing Miss Marple to follow her down a dim corridor. At the far end, behind a heavy wooden door, lay a modest archive, rows of leather-bound ledgers and yellowed pages cataloguing the convent's history. We do not often have reason to consult these, the Reverend Mother murmured, as she traced her fingers along the spines of the volumes. But Sister Margaret insisted. Miss Marple's hands were light but swift as she leafed through the pages, looking for a sign of what had caught Sister Margaret's attention. The ink was faded in places, but one entry stood out, a record from nearly 20 years prior. Young woman admitted under uncertain circumstances. No family recorded. Name, Margaret. The last name had been crossed out. Miss Marple tapped the entry thoughtfully. Tell me, Reverend Mother, was Sister Margaret always known by that name? Reverend Mother Beatrice's hands tightened in the folds of her habit. She came to us young, perhaps 17 or 18. I do not know her life before she joined. Miss Marple noted the way her gaze did not quite meet hers. But you suspect, don't you? A long pause. Then finally, a sigh. There were whispers, Reverend Mother admitted, that she came from a troubled past, that she sought refuge. Here, Miss Marple nodded, and now, after all these years, she was looking back at that past. The Reverend Mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes. Miss Marple's thoughts turned over this new revelation. Sister Margaret had not merely been a nun. She had been someone else before she took her vows, someone whose past had been obscured. As they left the archive, Miss Marple noticed something peculiar. A small thread of black cloth caught on the doorframe. Not the rough weave of a nun's habit, but something finer. She plucked it free, tucking it away before turning back to the Reverend Mother. Tell me, who has access to these records? Only myself and the archivist, Sister Lucille. Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest. Sister Lucille. Might I speak with her? The Reverend Mother hesitated. She has been unwell these past weeks. A frail constitution. Miss Marple inclined her head. All the same, I should like to speak with her. Sister Lucille was found in her small cell, a gaunt woman with weary eyes. She blinked up at Miss Marple as she entered, her fingers twisting a handkerchief nervously. "You have been ill, my dear," Miss Marple said kindly. "Yet I understand. You are the keeper of the convent's records." Sister Lucille nodded slowly. "Yes, though I have not been well enough to attend them lately." Miss Marple studied her carefully. "Do you recall Sister Margaret coming to see them?" A hesitation. Then a slow nod. "She was looking for an old entry. I did not ask why." Miss Marple's voice was soft, coaxing. "And yet, the journal she kept vanished. Do you know anything about that?" A flicker of fear in Sister Lucille's eyes. "No." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "Someone was in her room that night." Sister Lucille swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the handkerchief. "You are afraid," Miss Marple said gently, "and I believe I know why. You too have seen something, haven't you?" The woman let out a shaky breath. I saw someone leaving the archives late that night." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Who?" Sister Lucille shook her head. "I could not see their face, but they were wearing a cloak, dark, not like the habits we wear." Miss Marple considered this, the black cloth she had found on the doorframe. A figure in a cloak moving through the convent unseen, someone who did not want their presence known. She reached out, patting Sister Lucille's hand reassuringly. "You have been most helpful, my dear." As she left, Sergeant Graves fell into step beside her. "So, we've got a missing past, a missing journal, and a mysterious figure creeping about in the night. Any thoughts?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "Many, and I rather think we are closing in." Graves huffed. "But on what?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "On why Sister Margaret had to die." The convent held its secrets tightly, but the threads were beginning to fray, and soon the truth would come tumbling out. The convent had settled into its usual silence, but the hush carried a different weight now, a breathless expectation that the mystery would soon unravel. In the dim glow of candlelight, Miss Marple and Sergeant Graves stood in the Reverend Mother's study, where a collection of evidence, notes, statements, and small but telling objects had been carefully arranged. The missing journal had yet to surface, but the revelation of Sister Margaret's past had shifted the course of the investigation. Then came the interruption. A firm knock at the door, and one of the junior nuns, her cheeks flushed with urgency, stepped inside. "Pardon me, Reverend Mother," she said breathlessly, eyes darting between them. "There has been a discovery." Miss Marple and Graves exchanged a glance before following the young woman down a narrow hall and into the convent's small storage chamber. A handful of nuns stood in a tight cluster near an old wooden trunk, whispering anxiously. As they stepped aside, the object of their concern became clear, a dark cloak neatly folded atop the trunk. Graves exhaled sharply. Well, looks like we found our phantom in the night." Miss Marple stepped forward, running a gloved hand over the fabric. It was thick, far too fine for a nun's attire, and there, on the edge of the sleeve, was a familiar thread, frayed where it had caught against something rough. The same material she had found in the archive doorway. Graves turned toward the Reverend Mother. Who does this belong to? Her expression was troubled. I do not know. It is not from the convent. One of the nuns hesitated before speaking. I saw Sister Agnes carrying something dark last evening. A murmur rippled through the group. Sister Agnes, the nervous young woman who had first discovered the body. Miss Marple's mind worked quickly. Sister Agnes had been hesitant, afraid, insistent that she had only seen a shadow that night. Had she lied, or had she been protecting someone? Sergeant Graves straightened. I believe we need to have a word with Sister Agnes. It did not take long to find her. She was kneeling in the chapel, fingers twisted in prayer, though her hands trembled as they rested against the wooden pew. When she looked up and saw them standing there, her eyes widened in alarm. Sister Agnes, Graves said firmly, we need to speak with you. She rose slowly, her face pale. Of course. Back in the study, the cloak lay across the desk as a silent accusation. We found this in storage, Graves said. One of the sisters claimed she saw you with it. Sister Agnes's gaze darted to the cloak, her lips parting, but she remained silent. You were the first to find Sister Margaret, Miss Marple said gently. And you were near the archives that night. You are afraid of something, dear. I do not believe you are responsible for Sister Margaret's death, but I do believe you know more than you have told us. A tremor passed through her, and then, with a shaky breath, she whispered, I took the journal. Even Graves looked momentarily startled. You, what? Sister Agnes wrung her hands. I did not harm Sister Margaret, I swear it, but after she died I feared what might be inside her journal. So I took it. Miss Marple's expression did not change, but her mind moved swiftly. And where is it now? Tears welled in the nun's eyes. I burned it. A sharp silence fell over the room. Graves let out a curse under his breath. You destroyed evidence? I was afraid, Sister Agnes cried. I thought, what if it contained something dangerous? What if it harmed the convent? Miss Marple studied her carefully. There was sincerity in her voice, genuine fear. And yet, something was missing. You did not kill Sister Margaret, Miss Marple said, almost to herself. And yet you knew the journal was important enough to destroy. Sister Agnes nodded miserably. I only read part of it. There was a name, just one. Miss Marple leaned forward. Whose name? The nun swallowed hard. Edmund Latimer, the Reverend Mother gasped. Graves turned sharply. Who is Edmund? Latimer? The Reverend Mother's hands tightened at her sides. A man long gone from this place. Miss Marple's mind whirred. She had suspected the past was at the heart of this, and now the name of a man had surfaced. She turned to Sister Agnes. Did you recognize the name? She shook her head. No. Miss Marple turned back to the Reverend Mother, her expression gentle but firm. But you do, don't you? The older woman hesitated, then sighed. He was a benefactor many years ago, a man of some wealth who aided the convent. But there were rumors. What kind of rumors? Graves asked. The Reverend Mother's lips pressed together. That he was not what he appeared to be. That he had dealings outside the law. A wealthy benefactor. A mysterious past. A nun searching through records before her death. The pieces were shifting, but something was still not quite right. Graves exhaled. If Sister Agnes destroyed the journal, We've lost the best clue we had." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Oh, I do not think so, Sergeant." He frowned. "How do you figure?" She turned back to Sister Agnes. "My dear, if you truly wished to destroy what was in the journal, you would have burned it immediately. But you read it first. You hesitated." Sister Agnes looked stricken. "Miss..." Marple's voice softened. "Which means that perhaps you did not burn all of it." A long pause. Then, with a choked sob, Sister Agnes reached into the folds of her habit and produced a single, half-burned page. Miss Marple took it gently, eyes scanning the damaged text. The ink was smudged, but one phrase stood clear. "He is here." A chill passed through the room. Graves straightened. "Who is here?" Miss Marple exhaled slowly. "I rather think, Sergeant, that we have all been looking in the wrong direction. We assumed the danger came from the past, but it seems the past has already found its way inside these walls." Sister Agnes shuddered. Miss Marple's fingers brushed over the burned page. Sister Margaret had discovered something she had been trying to warn them about. The authorities would believe they had their culprit in Sister Agnes. The journal was destroyed, and the case would seem to close neatly. But Miss Marple knew better. The true danger had not yet revealed itself, and whoever had killed Sister Margaret was still watching, waiting. The real game had just begun. The convent stone walls, once a refuge from the world outside, now seemed to close in with their weight of secrets. Miss Marple sat in quiet contemplation, the half-burned journal page resting lightly in her hands. "He is here." The word sent a shiver through her, though she was far from surprised. Sister Margaret had not been killed for something she had done in the present. No, her death had been a consequence of a past long thought buried. And if her final words were true, then the past had returned in the most chilling way possible. "Sergeant." Graves paced the room, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Edmund Latimer," he muttered. "That's the name she found in the records. A man of wealth, a benefactor to the convent, but with secrets." He exhaled sharply. "And now we're meant to believe that he's here. That's impossible. The man would be, what, in his 70s at least?" The Reverend Mother stood near the window, her usually composed expression troubled. "More than 70, she murmured. "He would be nearly 80 if he still lived." Miss Marple lifted her gaze. "Did you ever meet him personally, Reverend Mother?" A pause, then a slow nod. "Once. Long ago." Miss Marple studied her carefully. "And you say there were rumours?" The Reverend Mother turned, clasping her hands before her. "There were whispers, yes, but nothing that could ever be proven. He donated generously to the convent, paid for the repairs to our chapel, funded the orphanage we once ran. But some said his money came from unsavoury dealings." Miss Marple nodded. She had known men like Edmund Latimer before. Wealthy, well-connected, with pasts conveniently obscured by power and influence. But even the most carefully buried secrets had a way of resurfacing. Sergeant Graves frowned. If he's alive, where has he been all these years? And more importantly, why would Sister Margaret's interest in him get her killed now? Miss Marple's fingers traced the edge of the burned page. Perhaps she found something more than just his name. Perhaps she found something, or someone. The words hung in the air. The thought was unsettling. If Latimer was truly here, in some form or another, then his past had already entwined itself with the convent. A knock at the door made them all turn. One of the younger nuns hesitated in the doorway, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Pardon me, Reverend Mother," she said hesitantly. "But Sister Anne has asked for Miss Marple. She says it's urgent." Miss Marple rose at once, smoothing the folds of her cardigan. "Then I shall not keep her waiting." Sister Anne had been one of the quieter figures throughout the investigation, neither avoiding nor volunteering information, simply watching. She stood now in the cloister's garden, the wind tugging at her veil, her fingers nervously twisting the rosary at her waist. Miss Marple approached with a warm but expectant expression. "You wish to see me, sister?" The younger woman nodded, quickly glancing around before speaking in a hushed voice. I was afraid to say anything before, but I think I remember something that might be important." Miss Marple encouraged her with a gentle nod. Sister Anne took a breath. "It was many years ago, before I took my final vows. There was a man, a visitor. He came to the convent once, asking questions about a child who had been left in our care. I remember because he was unsettling. He spoke with a kindness that did not reach his eyes." Miss Marple listened intently. "A child?" Sister Anne nodded. "One of the orphans. A boy. The record should have his name, but I remember him as Gabriel." The name landed like a stone in the pool of Miss Marple's thoughts. A forgotten child. A man searching for him. A nun who had uncovered something that led to her death. The pieces were slowly shifting into place. "What happened to the boy?" she asked. Sister Anne hesitated. "He disappeared." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Disappeared? He was adopted. That's what they told us. But no one ever came to claim him." A strange hush fell over the garden. Miss Marple's mind was racing. If Edmund Latimer had been searching for a child all those years ago, and that child had vanished under mysterious circumstances, then perhaps Sister Margaret had found the truth of what really happened to him, and if he was here, in the convent. The answer struck her with quiet certainty. She turned back to Sister Anne. "This man who came asking about the child, did you ever see him again?" The nun hesitated. I don't know. He had a scar just above his eyebrow. I remember that." Miss Marple inhaled sharply. A scar. A small but defining feature, a feature she had seen before. She turned swiftly and began walking, her pace brisk. Graves, who had been watching from a distance, fell into step beside her. "Where are we going?" "To find the man who has been hiding in plain sight," she said. Graves frowned. "Who?" Miss Marple didn't answer. She had already suspected that Sister Margaret's death had been committed not by an outsider, but by someone who lived among them. Someone whose past was entwined with the convent's history. Someone who had been waiting for years, unnoticed, until Sister Margaret discovered the truth. She stepped into the corridor, her gaze sweeping across the few figures moving within. And then she saw him. Brother Thomas. The quiet, unassuming lay brother. The man who had come to the convent years ago seeking a life of service. A man whose past had never been questioned because he had asked for so little. Miss Marple moved toward him, watching as his eyes met hers, and in that fleeting moment, something flickered there. Recognition. She stopped before him, her voice soft but unyielding. Or should I say, Gabriel? A sharp, startled breath. Sergeant Graves stiffened beside her. Brother Thomas, Gabriel, stood frozen for only a moment before something in his expression shifted. His shoulders straightened. and for the first time, Miss Marple saw not the humble servant, but the man beneath, a man with a past he had spent his life hiding. Miss Marple tilted her head slightly. "You have been here all along, haven't you?" A beat of silence. Then finally a slow, quiet reply. Yes. The past had never truly left the convent. It had been living within its walls the entire time. Miss Marple studied Brother Thomas, or Gabriel, as the weight of recognition settled over the room. The moment of stillness was deceptive, masking the tension beneath. His face, composed yet taut, carried the ghost of the boy Sister Anne had described, a child lost, forgotten, and perhaps shaped into something unrecognizable by the passage of time. Sergeant Graves shifted beside her. "I suppose now would be the time for you to start explaining," he said, his voice edged with restrained authority. Brother Thomas, Gabriel, tilted his head slightly. "Explain what exactly?" His voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was a wariness in his eyes. Miss Marple, ever unassuming, smiled faintly. "Why, everything, dear boy." She gestured lightly toward the quiet hallway behind them. For instance, how a man searching for his own past could slip so seamlessly into a place like this. His lips pressed together, and for a moment he said nothing. The silence stretched, delicate and fragile as a thread about to snap. Then Miss Marple did something unexpected. She sighed and shook her head, as though disappointed in herself. "I do apologize, Sergeant. I fear I may have misjudged the situation." "Entirely." Graves frowned, clearly uncertain. "What are you getting at?" Miss Marple's expression remained regretful as she turned back to Brother Thomas. "You were protecting her, weren't you?" Something in the lay brother's face flickered, so briefly that anyone less observant would have missed it. A tightening of the jaw. The barest intake of breath. Miss Marple pressed forward gently, as though she were merely pondering aloud. "You must have known what Sister Margaret had discovered, but perhaps you were too late to stop it. And now, here we are, troubling you with our questions when all you ever wanted was peace." Brother Thomas's gaze darkened, but he remained silent. Miss Marple turned to the Reverend Mother, who had been watching quietly. "I must admit, I've been rather forgetful. You keep impeccable records, don't you, Reverend Mother?" "For me?" Older woman hesitated. "Yes, of course. Every name, every donation, every visitor. Even," Miss Marple said lightly, "a man named Edmund Latimer." Brother Thomas exhaled sharply, a reaction, a small, fleeting thing, but enough. Miss Marple's eyes glimmered. "Ah." Brother Thomas turned slightly away, as if collecting himself. But Miss Marple had seen enough. She had used the name of Edmund Latimer not as an accusation, but as a test. And now she had her answer. Brother Thomas, Gabriel, was not merely connected to the past. He was the past. And he had spent years hiding in plain sight, waiting for the day when no one would remember what had been taken from him. Sergeant Graves, who had caught on as well, folded his arms. "You knew the name." Gabriel said nothing. Miss Marple clasped her hands together. "Oh, my dear, you must see that the truth is unraveling itself whether you wish it to or not. You have spent so long concealing it, but I'm afraid deception cannot last forever." Gabriel's jaw clenched. His hands resting at his sides flexed almost imperceptibly. Miss Marple, ever gentle, took a small step closer. "You see, I have a rather foolish habit of paying attention to things that others ignore, and I noticed something very peculiar earlier. A simple thing, really, but one that gave you away entirely." Gabriel's eyes flickered toward her. Miss Marple tilted her head. "Your hands." Sergeant Graves frowned. "His hands." Miss Marple smiled. "Oh, yes. A man's hands often tell the truth his lips do not. A lifetime in a convent, especially in the work of a lay brother, would leave its marks. Calluses, roughness, the signs of labor. But Gabriel's hands—" She studied them once more, as if confirming her own suspicions. "They are too careful, too controlled." Graves stared at them now as well. "What does that mean?" Miss Marple's voice was soft. "It means that our dear brother Thomas is not merely a man of God. He is a man who has lived 2 lives. Gabriel's expression was unreadable. Miss Marple continued, "And I believe Sister Margaret uncovered something that made her very dangerous to you, not because she wished you harm, but because she knew." A silence fell. The wind outside rattled the old glass of the convent windows. Gabriel's fingers twitched, and then finally he spoke. She wasn't supposed to find it. His voice was low, distant, as if speaking to himself rather than to them. Graves took an instinctive step closer. "Find what?" Gabriel closed his eyes briefly. "The letter." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. "A letter?" Gabriel inhaled, sharply. "I wrote it. Years ago, before I came here. I thought it had been destroyed." His voice was strained, his careful mask beginning to crack. But somehow, it found its way back. Sergeant Graves took a firm stance. "And what exactly did this letter say?" Gabriel swallowed. "It named the man who took everything from me." His voice hardened. "Edmund Latimer." Miss Marple studied him with quiet sympathy. "And Sister Margaret found it." A nod. A slow, weary nod. "She came to me," he admitted. "She said she had something important, something that would change everything. But when she showed it to me, I knew. I knew that if anyone else saw it, my past would be dragged into the light." Graves pressed forward. "And so you killed her?" Gabriel's head snapped up. "No." A beat of silence. Miss Marple, watching him closely, nodded. "You're telling the truth." Gabriel exhaled shakily. "I confronted her, yes. I begged her to forget what she had found, but she wouldn't." He closed his eyes. "She was alive when I left her." Miss Marple turned to Graves. "Then we are still missing a piece." Gabriel's lips parted slightly, as if about to say something. But then from the hallway, a quiet sound echoed, a footstep, halting just beyond the door. Miss Marple's sharp eyes darted toward it. Someone had been listening, and suddenly she knew. The true murderer was still waiting in the shadows. The sound of the footstep outside the door sent a ripple of awareness through the room. Miss Marple's sharp gaze flicked toward it, while Sergeant Graves moved swiftly, yanking open the door. The dimly lit hallway stretched ahead, empty, but for the faint flicker of candlelight against the stone walls. A distant door clicked shut. Graves stepped out, scanning both ends of the corridor. "Someone was listening," he muttered. Miss Marple, ever composed, clasped her hands. "And I do believe they heard rather more than they should have." Gabriel, his face pale but steady, exhaled. If they've been eavesdropping, they know the letter exists. The Reverend Mother's face tightened. That letter should never have remained in the convent. Miss Marple turned back to Gabriel. You last saw it with Sister Margaret? Yes, he said. She had it in her hands when I left her room. Graves narrowed his eyes. And when you found her body? Gabriel hesitated. It was gone. Miss Marple sighed. Which means someone took it before we ever arrived. Graves turned, sharply on his heel, stepping briskly down the corridor. I'll search her quarters myself. If that letter is still in this building, I'll find it. Miss Marple followed at a steady pace, her mind already whirring through possibilities. It was clear now that Sister Margaret's death was not a simple matter of secrecy or fear. Someone had acted with deliberate intent, ensuring that the truth she had uncovered was buried along with her. And now, that same someone was moving swiftly to eliminate any remaining traces. By the time they reached Sister Margaret's quarters, the door was ajar. Graves entered first, eyes sweeping over the small, modest room. The bed was neatly made, the wooden desk against the wall undisturbed. At first glance, everything appeared untouched. But as Miss Marple stepped inside, her sharp eyes noticed something at odds with the otherwise orderly scene. The drawer of the desk, ever so slightly open. Graves noticed it too and immediately pulled it fully out, empty. Gabriel stepped forward. It was here. His voice was certain. When she showed it to me, she took it from that very drawer. Miss Marple, undeterred, turned toward the bedside table. She reached for the single candle sitting atop it, lifting the base carefully. A fine dusting of paper ash clung to the wood beneath. She looked up at Graves. Someone was in this room, not long ago. Graves's jaw tightened. If they've burned it, we'll never know what it said. Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, frustration leaking into his otherwise controlled demeanor. There was a name, a connection. Miss Marple dusted her fingers together, letting the ash fall. And whoever took that letter wants to make certain we never find out who else was involved. Just then, a sharp cry echoed from the hall. Graves was the first to react, stepping quickly back into the corridor. A nun stood a few feet away, pale and shaken, clutching at her habit. "The archives," she stammered. Miss Marple stepped forward, her heart quickening. "What about the archives, my dear?" The nun swallowed hard. "They've been ransacked." Graves didn't wait. He turned sharply and strode down the corridor with Miss Marple and Gabriel close behind. When they reached the convent's small archive room, the sight that met them was undeniable. Drawers pulled from their slots, stacks of papers overturned. A small pile of ash in the corner, the remnants of something burned hastily and without care. Graves knelt, sifting through the papers that had been discarded. Parish records, donation lists, correspondence. He exhaled sharply. Someone was looking for something specific. Miss Marple's gaze travelled across the room, her mind assembling the pieces. "No," she murmured. "Someone was removing something specific." Gabriel's expression darkened. "They're covering their tracks." Miss Marple nodded. The letter alone was not enough. Whatever Sister Margaret found, it must have been linked to the convent's own records. Graves clenched his jaw. "And now it's gone." Miss Marple surveyed the chaos with quiet resolve. "Not necessarily." Gabriel looked at her sharply. "You think something was overlooked?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. Oh, my dear boy, no one is ever quite as thorough as they believe themselves to be. She stepped forward, moving carefully among the scattered papers, her fingers skimming over them lightly. Then she paused, tilting her head at a small folded sheet wedged between the fallen drawers. She plucked it delicately and unfolded it. For a long moment she simply studied it. Then she handed it to Graves. His eyes moved over the words, his brow furrowing. This is a record of a visitor. Gabriel leaned in. What visitor? Graves exhaled. Edmund Latimer. A ripple of silence passed through the room. Miss Marple's voice was soft but certain. He was here. Gabriel's hands clenched. That means he... Miss Marple nodded. Yes, he was part of this. Graves folded the paper carefully, his mind already shifting into action. Then it's time we found him. But Miss Marple, ever thoughtful, glanced once more at the disarrayed room. Someone had gone to great lengths to destroy the truth. And that meant one thing was certain. The real killer was growing desperate. A gust of wind rattled the convents. Stone windows as Miss Marple folded her hands over her handbag, her sharp eyes fixed on the name written on the crumpled visitor's log, Edmund Latimer, the missing link. The very moment they had begun closing in on the truth, it had been erased. First the letter, then the archives. The killer was not simply covering their tracks. They were watching, reacting, anticipating. And now, they had been forced to act again. A heavy silence settled over the room. Gabriel's face was pale, his mind racing. If Edmund Latimer was here, then he must have spoken to Sister Margaret. She must have discovered something so dangerous that she had to be silenced. Graves nodded grimly. We need to find Latimer before whoever's behind this gets to him first. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl. And yet, I fear it may already be too late. Before anyone could press her on this ominous statement, the convent's heavy bells tolled, a deep and resonant chime that sent a shiver through the cold walls. But it was not the usual measured rhythm of the evening prayers. This was an alarm. A cry echoed from outside. Graves was the first to react, dashing toward the courtyard. Miss Marple followed, moving swiftly despite her age. Gabriel, his face tense, was close behind. As they reached the archway leading to the convent's small garden, a cluster of nuns stood in a tight, fearful circle, their habits shifting in the cold wind. And at the center of it all, sprawled at the base of the convent's old stone well, was a man's body. Graves stepped forward, kneeling beside the figure. The man's dark overcoat was sodden from the damp earth, his face turned away, but there was no mistaking the limp stillness of death. Gabriel exhaled sharply. Is it? Graves turned the man's face toward them. Miss Marple's breath hitched. Edmund Latimer. The man they had just discovered was tied to the crime, was now lying dead at their feet. One of the nuns, her voice shaking, whispered, He must have fallen into the well, but it has been dry for years. Miss Marple crouched slowly, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. No visible wounds, no blood. His clothing, while damp, bore no obvious signs of a struggle. But as she looked closer, she noticed something peculiar. His right hand was curled tightly into a fist, and just peeking from between his fingers was a scrap of fabric. She plucked it delicately, unfolding the damp cloth. It was dark blue, edged, with gold embroidery. Gabriel inhaled sharply. That looks like part of a nun's habit. The Reverend Mother's face darkened. But none of our sisters wear embroidery. Graves straightened. Then someone was wearing a disguise. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. And whoever they are, they did not intend for Latimer to live long enough to speak. Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping. This means the killer is still here, still watching. Miss Marple looked once more at the fabric in her hand. The edges were frayed, hastily torn. Whoever had been here when Latimer died had not expected him to fight back, which meant he had seen their face. Graves turned to the assembled nuns. Did anyone see him enter the convent? A younger nun, Sister Beatrice, stepped hesitantly forward. I did. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He arrived less than an hour ago. He asked for the Reverend Mother, but she was in prayer. I told him to wait in the vestibule, but when I returned, he was gone. Miss Marple's expression softened. Did he seem afraid? Beatrice nodded. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as though someone were following him. Graves clenched his jaw. And now he's dead. Gabriel exhaled sharply. Whoever he was running from followed him inside. He was silenced before he could tell us the truth. Miss Marple turned her gaze toward the towering stone walls of the convent. The wind rustled through the trees, but there were no other sounds. No hurried footsteps, no sign of movement, and yet she felt it. The presence of someone nearby, watching, waiting. She looked down at Latimer's still form once more. The killer had made a grave mistake. In their haste to silence him, they had drawn attention to themselves. And now, they had left behind a clue they could not erase. She carefully folded the scrap of fabric and slipped it into her handbag. I do believe, my dear friends, that we are dealing with someone who is growing increasingly desperate. Graves exhaled sharply. Then we'd best move quickly, before they strike again. Miss Marple, ever composed, glanced once more at the darkened convent corridors. The answer was here, hidden in the whispers of the past. And now the race was on to uncover the truth, before the killer claimed another life. The convent had settled into a hushed, uneasy stillness. The nuns had retreated, murmuring prayers in the chapel for the soul of Edmund Latimer. But the atmosphere was thick with something beyond grief, fear. Someone among them, or close enough to move freely in their world, was a murderer. And they were watching. Miss Marple, seated in a quiet alcove near the cloister's edge, let her fingers brush over the scrap of dark blue fabric in her handbag. The convent's nuns wore only black and white. This embroidery was foreign to their habits. The answer was here. She was sure of it, concealed within the folds of routine, in the overlooked gestures and half-truths of those she had questioned. Gabriel paced before her, his mind racing. This wasn't random. Whoever killed Latimer had been following him for some time. Graves exhaled, arms crossed, and the moment he arrived here, they struck. They knew he would lead us to something. Miss Marple adjusted the delicate lace at her sleeve. Perhaps they feared what he might confess. Gabriel paused. Confess? She nodded. Consider the urgency of his visit. He sought refuge in the convent, just as Sister Margaret had. Her voice remained gentle but firm, and he was silenced before he could say why. Graves frowned. The connection between them, what was it? Miss Marple's gaze drifted toward the high stone walls. Perhaps we should ask the one person who knew both of them. Moments later, the Reverend Mother sat before them, her fingers clasped over her rosary, her expression calm, yet deeply troubled. Miss Marple's voice was kind but unwavering. "Reverend Mother, you knew Edmund Latimer, did you not?" A pause, then a nod. "Years ago, before he left the church." Gabriel straightened. "Left the church?" The Reverend Mother sighed. "He was once Brother Edmund, a novice. He had taken his vows, but his heart was restless." Miss Marple's lips pressed together. "And did Sister Margaret know him from that time?" The Reverend Mother hesitated, her eyes searching the past. "Yes, but only briefly. He left before she arrived. It is strange. She never spoke of him to me." A silence fell. Graves was the first to speak. "Then why was he here now? And why was he afraid?" Miss Marple's mind turned over the pieces like a delicate tapestry, looking for the frayed edge, the loose thread that would unravel the entire design. An embroidered scrap of fabric, a frightened man returning to a place he had abandoned, a nun who kept secrets even from her own sisters. And suddenly the pattern began to emerge. She turned to the Reverend Mother once more. "Forgive me, but I must ask. Was there ever another woman who left the convent under unusual circumstances? Someone who might have known both Edmund Latimer and Sister Margaret?" The Reverend Mother stiffened slightly, and for the first time, a shadow passed over her serene features. "There was one," she admitted, "many years ago." Gabriel leaned forward. "Who?" The Reverend Mother lowered her gaze. "Sister Anne." Miss Marple's breath caught. "Sister Anne?" The Reverend Mother nodded slowly. "She was here before either Margaret or Edmund Latimer, a quiet woman, devout. But one day she left without a word." Miss Marple's voice was quiet. "And you never heard from her again?" The Reverend Mother's eyes darkened with something resembling sorrow. "No. She disappeared entirely." A long silence stretched between them. Miss Marple's fingers brushed once more over the scrap of embroidered fabric. A nun who left, a man who abandoned his vows, and a woman who had tried to uncover a secret buried in time. The connection had been in plain sight all along. She stood abruptly, her eyes sharper than ever. "Reverend Mother, would you permit me to examine the convent's records once more?" The Reverend Mother hesitated but nodded. "Of course." Graves and Gabriel exchanged glances, but followed as Miss Marple strode back toward the convent's dimly lit archives. This time she knew what she was looking for. The records had been carefully preserved, their ink faded but legible. She traced her fingers along the pages until she found the name she sought. Sister Anne. And beside it, her hand stilled. Gabriel, peering over her shoulder, frowned. "What is it?" She pointed to a single line scrawled in the margins. A note. Nearly overlooked, transferred to St. Gertrude's convent. Gabriel's brow furrowed. "St. Gertrude's? That's in London." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with understanding. "Indeed." She turned to Graves. "Inspector, would you be so kind as to retrieve the convent's visitor logs once more?" Graves wasted no time, returning moments later with the aged books. He placed them on the table, and Miss Marple flipped carefully through the pages. Then she stopped. Her finger hovered over a single entry. The name was written in careful, deliberate script. Anne Latimer. Gabriel let out a sharp breath. "Latimer, Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. Sister Anne was Edmund Latimer's sister. The pattern was complete. Sister Margaret had uncovered a secret, one tied to a woman who had once worn a nun's habit and then disappeared from history. Edmund Latimer had come searching for the truth about his sister, and for that he had been killed. And somewhere within these walls, the murderer still lurked. Miss Marple remained perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the name in the visitor logs. Anne Latimer. The significance of that quiet notation sent a ripple through the fabric of the case, unraveling the final tangled threads. Gabriel exhaled sharply. His sister. This was about her all along. Graves, rubbing his chin, shook his head. But why? What happened to Sister Anne, and why did someone want to keep it hidden? Miss Marple, still staring at the page, spoke softly. Because what happened to Sister Anne didn't just belong to the past. It was still alive, festering in someone's conscience. She turned to the Reverend Mother, who had stood quietly by, her hands folded. Reverend Mother, I must ask again, what do you truly know of Anne Latimer's departure? A flicker of unease crossed the older woman's face. I told you the truth. She left suddenly, without explanation. Miss Marple's tone remained gentle, but her eyes were unwavering. That is what you were told. But do you believe it? The Reverend Mother hesitated, something struggling beneath the surface of her composure. Miss Marple continued. She was transferred to St. Gertrude's, yes, but why? Was it truly her decision? The Reverend Mother looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. I do not know. I was young then, a simple nun. But I remember, she was troubled before. She left, afraid. Gabriel and Graves exchanged glances. Miss Marple's mind moved quickly now. Did Sister Anne ever confide in anyone? The Reverend Mother hesitated, then slowly shook her head. No one, except perhaps. A silence stretched. Miss Marple waited. Sister Agnes, the Reverend Mother finally said. They were close. Graves straightened. And where is Sister Agnes now? The Reverend Mother hesitated. She passed away some years ago. Miss Marple's hands tightened around the edge of the visitor log. Another door closed, another voice silenced. Gabriel spoke grimly. Then we need to find out what Sister Agnes knew. Miss Marple's mind was already racing ahead. If Anne Latimer had uncovered something, confided in Sister Agnes, and then vanished, what had she been running from? And why had Edmund, decades later, been drawn back into the same mystery? Then, a thought struck her, sharp as a blade. She turned abruptly to the Reverend Mother. Reverend Mother, did Sister Agnes leave behind any personal effects? Letters? Notes? Anything? The older woman hesitated, her brow furrowed. There were a few belongings, some books mostly. They were never claimed. Miss Marple's voice remained calm, but her heart beat faster. May I see them? Minutes later, they stood in a small, dusty storage room where a wooden chest rested in the shadows. The Reverend Mother unlocked it with a heavy key, lifting the lid to reveal its contents. Old prayer books, a rosary, a carefully folded piece of blue embroidery, identical to the scrap Miss Marple had found. And at the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, a small bundle of letters. Miss Marple carefully unfolded them, the parchment fragile with age. Her eyes moved swiftly over the faded ink. Then she stopped. Gabriel leaned closer. "What is it?" Miss Marple read aloud, her voice steady. "I fear I will not be believed. But Sister Anne did not leave of her own will. She knew something. She tried to speak of it, but there were those who wished it buried. I tried to warn her, but it was too late. She vanished, and I have been left with the weight of silence. I know the truth, but I dare not write it. There are those who still watch even now. I will carry this secret to my grave, unless someone is brave enough to listen." A hush fell over the room. Graves swore under his breath. She was silenced, and so was Latimer. Miss Marple traced the last line of the letter, her voice soft. "And the person responsible has been here all along." Gabriel tensed. "Who?" Miss Marple exhaled slowly, folding the letter with great care. "Someone who was here when Anne Latimer disappeared. Someone who still had reason to kill Edmund Latimer when he came looking for the truth." She turned to the Reverend Mother. "There is one last record I must see, the list of those who resided in this convent at the time Sister Anne vanished." The Reverend Mother, pale but composed, nodded. "I will fetch it at once." Minutes later, the old ledger lay open before them. Names, dozens of them. Miss Marple's finger moved down the list. Then she stopped. A single name. She tapped it gently. "There." Graves frowned. "That name. It's—" His voice trailed off, his eyes widening. Gabriel inhaled sharply. "It can't be." But Miss Marple only nodded, her expression filled with quiet certainty. "Oh, but it is. Because in that moment, the final veil had been lifted. The crime had never been about revenge, greed, or a simple cover-up. It had been about something far deeper, about fear, about the desperate need to bury a sin so terrible it had haunted its keeper for decades, and that keeper was still among them, watching, waiting, but not for much longer. Miss Marple sat in the convent's dimly lit library, her hands folded neatly before her. Across from her, the Reverend Mother sat rigid, her eyes darting toward the heavy oak door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Graves and Gabriel stood nearby, silent but alert, their presence adding to the quiet weight pressing down on the room. The convent had grown eerily still. The nuns had been ushered away, the corridors empty save for the distant toll of the evening bell. There was a sense of waiting, of inevitability, as though the walls themselves knew that the truth was about to be unearthed at last. The name in the ledger had not lied. The person responsible for Anne Latimer's disappearance, and for Edmund Latimer's murder, was still here, and they would come soon. Miss Marple's gaze never wavered from the open doorway. She had asked for the suspect to be sent for, and now it was simply a matter of patience. She had seen this moment many times before, the last, desperate act of a cornered mind. Soft footsteps echoed down the hall. Slow, measured. A shadow flickered against the stone wall, then stepped forward. Sister Benedict. The old nun moved with deliberate grace, her hands clasped before her. The lines of her face were unreadable, her dark eyes calm as they settled on Miss Marple. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of decades pressed between them. Miss Marple gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please, Sister Benedict, sit." The nun did not move. "Why have you summoned me?" Miss Marple's voice remained gentle. "Because we both know why Edmund Latimer had to die." A flicker, so slight, so brief that most would not have noticed it. But Miss Marple did. Sister Benedict's fingers tightened around the edge of her habit. "I have no idea what you mean." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "Don't you?" Silence. "Miss," Marple continued, her voice soft but unyielding. "He came here searching for answers. Not about his inheritance, as everyone believed, but about his sister. Anne Latimer never left this convent of her own accord. Something happened to her. Something terrible, and someone made certain it was never spoken of again." Sister Benedict's expression did not change. But her body, so still, so composed, was betraying her. A flicker of breath too fast, a shift of her stance, the weight of years pressing down. Miss Marple's voice did not rise, did not accuse. It merely laid the truth bare. Edmund Latimer's death was not about money, nor was it about revenge. It was about silence, about burying something that could not be allowed to surface. A pause, and then the final stroke. Miss Marple placed the fragile letter from Sister Agnes upon the table. "But silence cannot last forever, sister. Even the dead have voices, if only someone will listen." Something cracked. A tiny, imperceptible thing, a shift in the air. A weight in the room. Sister Benedict exhaled slowly. "I should have burned that letter." Her voice had changed. No longer the soft, measured tones of a woman devoted to her vows, but something deeper, older. Miss Marple met her gaze steadily. "But you didn't." A long pause. Then Sister Benedict moved at last, stepping forward. Her hands, still clasped, trembled slightly. "I have lived with this for so long," she murmured. "So many years, carrying it." Graves took an instinctive step forward, but Miss Marple held up a hand, stopping him. Sister Benedict was not going to run. Sister Benedict inhaled sharply. Anne Latimer was not meant to become a nun. The words were stark, the confession beginning not with an admission of guilt, but with something closer to regret. She was young, beautiful, full of spirit, and she caught the eye of the wrong man. Silence. Miss Marple did not interrupt. "Sister." Benedict closed her eyes. Father Thomas, he was respected, powerful. No one questioned him, not even when he took an interest in Sister Anne. Gabriel swore softly under his breath. Sister Benedict continued, her voice distant. Anne confided in Sister Agnes. She was frightened. She wanted to leave, but there was nowhere to go. And when she tried to speak out, her voice broke for the first time. They silenced her. Miss Marple's hands tightened in her lap. "Who?" Sister Benedict opened her eyes. They were rimmed with something ancient, something shattered. The Mother Superior, Father Thomas, and myself. A sharp inhale from Graves. Sister Benedict swallowed hard. "I was young. I believed I was protecting the convent, protecting our order. I told myself that we could not let scandal destroy everything we had built. So I did nothing. And when Anne Latimer disappeared, I let the silence bury her." She let out a hollow laugh. "She was sent away. To St. Gertrude's, they said. But that was a lie." Miss Marple's voice was barely a whisper. "Where did she go?" Sister Benedict's lips trembled. "She never left." The words hung, there, frozen. Gabriel took a step forward. "You mean—" Sister Benedict exhaled slowly. "She was buried in the old garden, under the roses." A terrible hush fell over the room. Miss Marple closed her eyes for a brief moment. The Whispering Nun had never left. She'd been crying for justice all these years, her voice carried in the winds, in the echoes of a mystery no one dared to. Graves moved towards Sister Benedict, but she shook her head. "There is no need," she murmured. "I will not fight. I have been a prisoner of my own making for too long." Miss Marple regarded her with a mixture of sadness and quiet understanding. Sister Benedict turned her gaze toward the darkened window. "I hear her sometimes, you know, in the night, in my dreams." A faint smile touched her lips. "Perhaps now she will let me rest." The door opened, and the constable stepped inside. Graves nodded grimly. Sister Benedict did not resist as they took her away. Miss Marple sat in silence, staring at the old, faded letter upon the table. Gabriel let out a breath. "It's over." Miss Marple turned to him, her voice soft but firm. "No, my dear. It is only now that it is truly beginning." For the first time in decades, the Whispering Nun would finally be heard. Miss Marple sat in the convent's quiet parlour, the weight of the evening pressing heavily upon her. The truth had been unearthed, and justice had at last reached Sister Benedict, yet something gnawed at the edges of her mind, a lingering whisper just out of reach. The case should have felt complete, but instead it felt unfinished. Graves poured himself a cup of tea from the convent's old silver set, the delicate clink of porcelain breaking the silence. "You should be pleased, Miss Marple. The confession was as clear as day." Sister Benedict admitted her part in Anne Latimer's death, and the police will find the remains beneath the roses before morning. She nodded absently, stirring her own tea without drinking. Across from her, Gabriel watched her carefully, his sharp journalist instincts noting the tension in her normally composed features. "You're troubled," he said quietly. Miss Marple looked up, her pale blue eyes thoughtful. "It all fits together so neatly, doesn't it?" Gabriel frowned. "You don't think she did it?" "Oh, she did it, dear," Miss Marple assured him. "Or at least she was part of it. But does that mean she was the one who killed Edmund Latimer?" Graves set his cup down sharply. "Miss Marple, she all but admitted it. She knew why he had to die. He was asking questions about his sister. She realized the truth was close to being exposed." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, that was certainly her motive. But that is not quite the same as saying she wielded the murder weapon herself." The room fell silent. Gabriel leaned forward. "You think there's someone else?" Miss Marple sighed, her spoon coming to rest in her cup. "Oh, my dear boy, I rather think there must be." Sister Benedict had lived under the weight of her guilt for years, but her crime was silence, not violence. She had done nothing to stop what happened to Anne, and she had allowed the lie to fester. But when I confronted her, she surrendered to the truth. She was exhausted by it. A woman like that does not kill in a moment of desperation. She has been drowning in guilt for decades. But murder, that requires a different kind of heart. Graves stood pacing. Then who else could it be? Miss Marple let out a soft breath, as if brushing dust from the edges of a thought. The murder of Edmund Latimer was swift, cold, professional. A man with no known enemies, a brother searching for his sister's fate, struck down before he could expose the truth. But what if the real culprit had nothing to do with Anne Latimer at all? Gabriel frowned. But that was the entire reason Edmund was killed. Miss Marple's expression remained placid, but her voice sharpened. That was the reason we assumed. A pause. Graves turned slowly. Then what was the real reason? Miss Marple gazed toward the darkened window. I believe it's time we spoke to Reverend Mother once more. The convent corridors were silent as they approached her quarters. Graves knocked firmly, and after a long pause the door creaked open. The Reverend Mother stood before them, her expression carefully controlled. "Miss Marple," she said smoothly, "what brings you back at this hour?" Miss Marple stepped inside, her hands folded neatly. "I fear we may have made a dreadful mistake." The Reverend Mother stiffened. "What do you mean?" Miss Marple walked past her, settling herself into the chair beside the fireplace. "Sister Benedict has been taken into custody, and no doubt she will answer for her part in Sister Anne's fate. But I have been asking myself something rather important. Did Sister Benedict ever actually lay eyes on Edmund Latimer before his death?" The Reverend Mother's eyes flickered. Miss Marple continued, her voice light, almost conversational. "She was an old woman. She rarely left the inner cloisters of the convent. Edmund Latimer arrived unannounced, asking questions, and within hours he was dead. But who knew he was coming? Who understood that he was about to uncover a secret buried for decades?" Silence. Miss Marple met her gaze, her voice soft but edged with steel. Who would benefit most from ensuring the past remained hidden? The Reverend Mother exhaled through her nose, her posture not shifting. "This is nonsense." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Is it? You have led this convent for over 30 years. You have dedicated your life to protecting it. Sister Benedict may have carried the weight of guilt, but you carried something far heavier, did you not?" A muscle twitched in the Reverend Mother's jaw. Miss Marple's voice was gentle, almost sorrowful. "You knew what had been done to Anne Latimer. You were part of the deception, and you knew that if Edmund uncovered the truth, the reputation of this convent would be ruined." Graves' expression darkened. "You were the one who ordered Edmund's murder." The Reverend Mother's lips pressed together. "You have no proof." Miss Marple's hands remained steady in her lap. "I rather think we do." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small leather-bound book. "The ledger from your office. Sister Benedict admitted that she should have burned the letter from Sister Agnes. But someone else did burn something, didn't they?" She turned the book gently, revealing the faint charred edges of a missing page. The Reverend Mother's face finally changed, a flicker of something deep and sharp in her eyes. Miss Marple continued, her voice quiet. "It wasn't just Anne Latimer's secret buried in the garden. It was yours." A pause. Then the Reverend Mother smiled. "A thin, brittle thing. You are very clever, Miss Marple." Miss Marple's expression remained serene. "Thank you, dear. I do try." The Reverend Mother stepped back as if measuring her next move. Graves stiffened, ready to intercept her, but she did not run. She simply exhaled, looking suddenly, terribly tired. "I did what I had to do," she murmured. "Edmund would have destroyed everything." Gabriel shook his head. "No, Reverend Mother. The only thing that was ever truly destroyed was Anne Latimer." She closed her eyes, a long silence stretching between them. Then, finally, she opened them and nodded. "I suppose," she said softly, "that silence is no longer an option." The door opened behind her, and the waiting constable stepped inside. Miss Marple watched as they led her away, her expression unreadable. Gabriel let out a breath. Now it's over. Miss Marple stirred her tea once more, taking a small sip. Yes, she murmured, and for the first time in years the convent was silent. But not with the weight of buried secrets. Only the quiet peace of the past finally laid to rest. As the Reverend Mother was led away, the hush of the convent settled like dust after a storm. Outside, the first light of dawn crept across the sky, casting long shadows through the arched windows. The case was closed, or so it seemed. Gabriel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. "Well," he said, his voice a mix of relief and exhaustion, "I suppose that's that." Miss Marple, still seated by the dwindling fire, did not answer immediately. She took a careful sip of her now lukewarm tea, her fingers resting lightly on the porcelain. Graves frowned. "You don't look satisfied, Miss Marple." She set her cup down with a gentle clink. "Oh, it's not that, dear. The truth has indeed been revealed, and yet I can't help but feel we have overlooked something." Gabriel stiffened. "Overlooked? But we have her confession. She admitted to ordering Edmund's murder to keep the past buried. What else is there?" Miss Marple tilted her head, a knowing glimmer in her eyes. "A confession is a curious thing, don't you think? What a person admits to, and more importantly, what they do not." Graves narrowed his eyes. "You think she was lying?" Miss Marple shook her head. "Not entirely. The Reverend Mother played a part in protecting the convent's secrets. She was willing to do terrible things in the name of preservation. But there is a question that remains unanswered, one that troubles me greatly." She let the silence stretch just long enough for them to lean in before she spoke again. "Who wielded the knife?" Gabriel blinked. "She ordered the murder. Someone carried it out." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, and I do not believe that person was Sister Benedict, nor was it the Reverend Mother herself. This was not the act of a woman cloistered behind these walls. It was a swift, precise killing, and yet we assumed that because the motive was within the convent, so was the murderer." A chill settled over the room. Graves exhaled. "Are you saying the real killer is still out there?" Miss Marple folded her hands in her lap. "I'm saying that we must ask ourselves a final question. If the Reverend Mother wanted to silence Edmund Latimer, who did she trust to do it?" Gabriel turned toward the door as if expecting someone to appear. Someone outside the convent. Miss Marple sighed. Perhaps not entirely outside. Someone who could move freely, who would not raise suspicion. Someone who was loyal to the Reverend Mother, but not bound by the same moral hesitations. Graves straightened suddenly, his face darkening. "The groundskeeper." Miss Marple smiled, though there was little warmth in it. "Very good, Colonel. The Reverend Mother could not have simply called upon any assassin. She needed someone with a reason to obey without question." Gabriel swore under his breath. Philip Warren. He was the only one who could come and go without raising suspicion. And now, he turned to the window, eyes scanning the misty garden below. "He's gone, isn't he?" Graves crossed to the door in 3 swift strides, yanking it open. The constables in the corridor looked up in surprise. "Where is Philip Warren?" Graves demanded. One of the officers hesitated. "He was seen heading toward..." The garden a short while ago. But with all the commotion, no one. Gabriel didn't wait to hear the rest. He was already running. Miss Marple rose far more composed and followed at her own measured pace. By the time she reached the courtyard, the first shout rang out, "He's gone!" A constable came sprinting back from the garden's far edge, his expression grim. "The gates! He's taken one of the bicycles. Must have slipped away in the chaos." Gabriel clenched his fists. "Damn it!" Graves muttered a curse of his own before turning to Miss Marple. "Well, my dear lady, it seems you were right again. We've caught the conspirator, but not the blade itself." Miss Marple exhaled, gazing toward the open gates. "Philip Warren has run, which tells us one thing very clearly." Gabriel frowned. "That he's guilty?" She nodded. "Yes, but more than that, it tells us he is afraid." The air was thick with the weight of unfinished business. The Reverend Mother would stand trial. The long-buried secrets of the convent would see the light of day. And yet, the man who had truly taken Edmund Latimer's life had slipped into the fog, vanishing down a road that stretched far beyond the walls of this place. Graves set his jaw. "We'll put out a warrant. He can't run forever." Gabriel rubbed, his temples, frustration clear on his face. "But he might run long enough." Miss Marple simply clasped her hands together, turning back toward the convent. "Justice is a patient thing," she murmured, "and so am I." She walked past them, the hem of her coat brushing the stone floor. Behind her, the convent remained still, its past no longer hidden, but its future uncertain. The case was solved, and yet, out in the world beyond the mist, a shadow still lingered. The wind had picked up by the time Miss Marple stepped beyond the convent gates, the hem of her coat fluttering, as she took a measured breath of the crisp morning air. The weight of resolution should have been settling by now, the satisfaction of a case well solved, and yet, as she looked toward the road where Philip Warren had vanished, something clung to her thoughts, a whisper of unfinished business. Gabriel fell into step beside her, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. "I should be relieved," he admitted, his voice low, as though reluctant to disturb the quiet that had settled. "The Reverend Mother will answer for her crimes. Warren will be found. It's only a matter of time." Miss Marple clasped her hands before her. "Perhaps." Gabriel glanced at her. "You don't sound convinced." She smiled slightly, though there was little mirth in it. "Oh, I have every confidence that justice will find Philip Warren. He is a man accustomed to hiding, but the fear in his flight will be his undoing." "No, dear, it is not him I am thinking about." Gabriel frowned. "Then what?" She looked back at the convent, its weathered stone walls standing resolute, as they had for generations. The Reverend Mother was willing to protect her secrets, yes, but people like her do not act in isolation. She had Warren to carry out her deed, certainly, but I find myself wondering just how deep her network of protection truly ran. Gabriel stopped, turning fully toward her. "You think there's someone else?" Miss Marple let out a soft breath, looking up toward the highest window where a lone candle flickered dimly against the pale morning. "Not another murderer, no, but I wonder if, even now, someone within those walls is already setting things back in order. A place like this, its secrets may have been disturbed, but they are not so easily discarded." A silence stretched between them before Gabriel sighed. "You mean to say the convent will protect its own?" She gave a small nod. "Yes, and what, I wonder, will be rewritten in the days to come?" Gabriel's mouth tightened. If that's the case, there's nothing more we can do. Miss Marple tilted her head slightly, considering. Perhaps not. But mysteries have a way of lingering, my dear. As if to prove her point, the heavy doors of the convent creaked open behind them, and Sister Benedict stepped forward. The young woman hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, the stark black of her habit fluttering against the morning breeze. Gabriel noticed her first, his expression shifting into something unreadable. "Sister Benedict," he acknowledged. Miss Marple merely watched as the nun approached, the stiffness of her movements betraying the weight of her thoughts. "You are leaving," she said, her voice soft but clear. Miss Marple smiled gently. "Yes, my dear, the case is closed." The nun hesitated. Her fingers twisted together once, then stilled. "Then you are satisfied?" Gabriel lifted an eyebrow. "Are you?" The question caught her off guard, and for the briefest moment something flickered in her gaze, something Miss Marple recognized all too well. Doubt, Sister Benedict swallowed. "The Reverend Mother," she confessed. Miss Marple inclined her head. "Yes." Another pause. And then, just barely above a whisper, "But not to everything." Gabriel straightened. "What do you mean?" Sister Benedict hesitated, her knuckles whitening as she clenched her hands together once more. Then, as though afraid of her own words, she looked away. "Nothing," she murmured, "nothing at all." She turned then, retreating quickly back toward the convent, her footsteps light but hurried. The door closed behind her with the finality of an ending. Miss Marple watched her go, a quiet understanding settling in her chest. Gabriel exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "What do you make of that?" Miss Marple's smile was faint, knowing. "Oh, my dear boy," she murmured, eyes glinting with something unreadable. "Some mysteries, you see, never truly end." And with that she turned, toward the waiting car, stepping forward into the morning light.